Hello stringers, it is Voodoo Stick Mod filling in for Ricky, and we are going to be making an In the Hoop Stuffy / fob today. We're going to be doing the Cookie Badger. Now this video will cover all 4x4 plushie / fobs that are going to be coming out, because all the general procedural steps are the same. The only thing that's different is what the design, how many design steps there might be, colors there might be in the overall design. This is a one hoop design, so it's not going to require you to do multiple hoopings where you have to add things to the final hoop. We're going to be looking at our color sheet here. This is going to give us our outline for what we're going to be doing. I have made notes. The first color stop is always going to be your die line. The color of the thread suggested here is going to be the suggested color for the base fabric. The next, on this one, the next bunch of steps are all design elements, with the very last color in the design also adding a placement stitch for if you want to add hardware to the top to make it a fob. The second to the last step is going to be your tack down for your hardware, and the last color stop is going to be your final outline stitching, which will leave you a hole for turning at the bottom. Now on this particular fob I used felt. I can tell you in 4x4 sizes, felt or other fabrics that won't have a lot of give to them, like a cotton woven or a flannel that doesn't have a lot of give to it, it's going to be harder to turn because they're pretty small. You can also use things like fleece, knit fabrics, minky, pretty much any fabric you want. Just keep in mind that if it doesn't have a lot of give or stretch, it's going to be harder to turn in this size. So I'm going to need a hoop with some medium weight cutaway. I'm going to need fabric. For this particular one, I decided to use minky. You're going to need, if you're doing the fob, you're going to need a piece of grosgrain or ribby ribbon, about 3 inches in length, and you're going to need hardware. I choose to use lobster claws because that means they can be clipped to anything. You can use whatever hardware you want. If your fabric is plush, you're going to want some of the plasticky type water-soluble stabilizer to put over while it stitches the design. That will help keep the design from getting lost in the nap, and it will also keep the little fuzzies from poking through the stitching. Let's see here. You're going to need a pokey outie tool. I use this stick I got from a tube turner. I also use chopsticks. I have them laying all over my house. Your pair of hemostats comes in very handy for helping to turn items, especially smaller ones, and for getting stuffing in there. You're also, obviously, for making a plush, you're going to need some sort of stuffing. I have snips, I have tweezers as well, and I think that's about, oh, and you might need some tapey tape to tape your water-soluble stabilizer down, or pins if you prefer to pin. I think that's about all we need to get us started, so I'm going to go ahead and throw this on the machine, and I'm going to run color step 1, which will give me my die line. Okay, I'm back and I've run the die line here. I'm going to turn the light on here, maybe help be able to see a little better. So I have the die line. I stitched it in a darker color than what was suggested on there, just so that it's easier to see on camera. But like I said, the first color stop is always the suggested color for the base fabric. All right, so I'm going to be putting my minky down. Now, minky has a nap to it, which means if I pet it one way, it's going to lay flat. If I pet it the other, it's going to stick up. You kind of see that on here. So I'm going to pet it down, and you can put it whichever direction you want on here. I like to make it so that you pet down. Okay. Generally, when you pet an animal, you pet from the head down. So that's how I'm going to lay it in here. Now you can use some temporary basting spray, some sticky spray. But if you do, that's it. You don't need to spray this on like you're getting ready to go out partying and you got to plaster on the Aquanet when you're in the 80s. Now I'm going to lay my fabric to cover my die line. Okay, make sure that's on nice and snug. And then I'm going to grab my water-soluble stabilizer. Now I'm a pinner. You don't have to pin, you can tape, cut this down so it's, you know, obviously I can't tape this if it's hanging off the stabilizer, but if I put it like this, you could tape it if you wanted to. Like I said, I'm a pinner, so I'm going to pin mine on, and I just keep a hand behind my hoop to guide my pin back up. Okay, I'm not pushing too hard, otherwise I'm going to pop this hoop open and we don't want to do that. So I'm just doing just enough. And the pin heads are on, you're pinning from the top. You don't want to pin from the bottom because then the pin heads are on the bottom and that's going to cause issues with your hoop sliding, or, you know, sliding over the bed of the machine. So I'm going to pin this. Now I'm not pinning this to pin the fabric down. I'm just pinning to keep the water soluble stabilizer taut over the top so that it doesn't get all bunchy. If you just lay it on, sometimes it'll kind of flop around a little as it gets stitching, it'll get bunchy. All right, so now I did that. Now I'm just, because I'm a pinner, I'm gonna flip this over and I'm making sure my pins are all well outside my die line so I don't have any issues there. Now I'm going to put this back on the machine and I'm gonna run all but the last 2 color stops. So I will see you back here before the second to last color stop. Okay, we're back, and as you can see, our pretty design is all stitched. So all we have left to do is, if we're going to add hardware to turn this into a plush fob, we will do that now. If you notice, there's a die line that's stitched with this last color here. And if we're going to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my pins and I'm going to pull off my plasticky stabilizer from around the outside. And then I can carefully pick out the inside pieces too. All right, that looks like just fuzz there, a little bit. Usually I kind of stick my tweezers in here and then I can pull up from one seam. That lets me get in there to get the other seam. Oh, it looks like there's a little jump stitch right there. So I'm gonna snip that real quick. And then I'm going to grab this piece of water soluble. Okay, so all that's removed. Okay, so if you're going to add hardware, you're going to take a piece of ribbon. Like I said, gross grain is better. Satin ribbon tends to fray out of things really easily, so I don't like to use that. I've singed the ends of this just to make sure that it's not going to fray. And then I'm going to put it so that about 1/2 inch with the raw ends is up above the die line. And then I'm going to tape that in. And then I'm just going to take a tiny piece of tape and, whoops, and I'm going to kind of tape down my hardware so that it doesn't bounce around. I'm going to put this back on the machine and then I will run the second to the last color stop. If you don't want to do this section, I will show you how to skip ahead in the next clip. Okay, I have tacked down my ribbon, so I can actually take this piece of tape off. I'm gonna leave this one for now, and then I'm going to grab my backing. Now, if you didn't want to add this, just skip the last part where this gets added and skip right ahead to this part where you're going to add the backing fabric. Lay it pretty side down So it's pretty side to pretty side. And then I'm going to tape both ends of that. I'm going to put this back on the machine and run the last color stop of my design. Okay, we're back and I have my final stitching stitched. You can see, because it's a stuffy and we need to turn it, there's an opening right here at the bottom. So I'm going to pull off the tape and I'm going to remove this from the hoop. Okay, now I'm going to want to trim around this. I think the best way to do that is with pinking shears, but you can use whichever scissors you like. Now you want to make sure though, right now I'm just going to cut off my excess stabilizer here. Okay, leave a tail down here where the opening is. So I'm going to snip with my pinking shears. I'm going to kind of snip up, but not through the line of stitching. Same with that side. And then now I'm going to get my scissors in here and I'm going to cut around. I want to get close to the stitching line, but not so that where I'm actually accidentally snipping it. So I'm leaving probably about 1/8 of an inch between the point of the pinking shear and the stitch line. And Minky with its fuzz gets a little messy, but it makes a really good plush. Okay, making my way around. And then as I come up to the opening again, I'm going to kind of fold this up out of the way so that I don't accidentally cut it off. All right, so that is all trimmed around. Okay, all trimmed around. And now if you want to be extra, make sure your curves are really good. If you have an inside corner like this, just take a regular pair of scissors and just snip up to but not through the stitching, and that'll help it turn a little bit easier and not get all scrunchy and bunchy in the corners there. Okay, so now it's time to turn it. So I usually start by, I'm going to stick my finger in here and I'm going to kind of feel around for the hardware. And if you add the hardware, that makes it easier. It kind of gives you a handle that you can reach in and grab. And so I've pulled the hardware through. And then now I'm just going to start carefully feeding the rest in the hole so that I can slowly turn it out here. Okay, and then I'm gonna poke my finger in. Now, if you don't have the hardware on the top, that's where the hemostats come in handy. You can stick that up through the turning hole, clamp onto the top, and kind of pull that through to feed it through. Then I'm going to take my chopstick or dowel or other blunt item, and I'm just going to kind of poke out all the appendages and the ears, and I kind of run the edge of it along the seam line. It helps get everything all poked out. Okay, now time to fill this bugger. I'm gonna grab some fluff here, and I'm going to start by just feeding just a little bit in. You don't necessarily want a big giant glob to start, and then I just use my finger to kind of push it up into the corners to get that going. And then, whoops, feed a little bit more in and push that blob up to the other side. And this is where another time where a hemostat can come in handy, because you can kind of like grab a blob of stuffing and clip it, and then you can use that, the hemostat that is, to kind of push it up in there, and then you let it go, and then you can kind of use the hemostat to kind of maneuver it around to where you want it to be. These little ones are a little more difficult to get the fluff through the openings, but it's a little opening, but you get it in there. And kind of using this to push stuff around and making sure I'm filling in along the seams so I don't have like little flat seams. And that seems to be pretty well done. Now I'm at the feet on the bottom, so I'm gonna stuff a little fluff in, and I'm gonna go push it over to the side. Okay, and then I'm gonna grab another little bunch, and I'm going to push that batch over to this foot. So both feet and all the appendages, ears, cheeks, that's all pushed out. So it's kind of, that means that now it's kind of flat in the middle if I squish it. So that leaves the last bit to go right up the center area and fill that in, so that I'm not pushing against center fluff to try to get stuff to the feet. I made room with the feet first. Okay, so he looks pretty well filled. I just kind of squash it around to kind of make sure there's no hard lumps, because sometimes the stuffing will kind of clump up into a hard little ball. And now the last part is to sew this little guy up. So I'm going to grab some thread and then I'm going to thread my needle and tie off a knot. Okay, now I want to push both of his turny tabs inside. Okay, and then I'm going to start sewing them up. I'm going to come from the inside. Now you can choose to sew them up however you wish. You can do a whip stitch, which would just be in one side out the other, over and over, or you can do a ladder stitch where you go parallel to the seam, pull tight, go across the opening parallel to that side of the seam, pull tight, and then just keep alternating that. If it's hard for you guys to see what I'm doing, because it's obviously white on white, you can look up ladder stitch, and there's lots of instructionals out there for how to do a ladder stitch. Going across, across, across. Now I just need to tie it off. And then a little trick, after you tie your knot, take your needle, feed it up somewhere into the center, pull really, really tight, snip your thread, and then that'll get sucked back in, and then your tails will get tucked in there so that it's less likely your knot's going to come undone. And that's all there is to it. We have now made a 4x4 plushie and a 4x4 plush fob. So stuffy, stuffy fob, plushie, plushy fob, whichever you'd like to call them.